Shocking. Cops assault black woman. Then discover she's their boss. Watch their faces go pale. The night was thick with tension as a sudden white flash sliced through the shadows of a dim-lit alleyway. Heavy footsteps echoed against brick walls, and their fear resonated like thunder in the air. A woman stood at the center, her figure tense, shoulders squared, eyes flashing with defiance. They grabbed her. Cuffed her. Yet, as sirens wailed in the distance, it was hard to believe this woman, in her crisp suit and perfectly pulled-back hair, was their superior. The officers exchanged glances, confusion swirling like smoke around them, as they wrestled with the shock value of the action they had just initiated. Flashes of regret raced across their faces. Why were they attacking one of their own? The first cop, a bulky man with a grizzled face, stiffened. Doesn't he look like a criminal? He spat out, disoriented as a knot tightened in his stomach. Murmurs rippled through the small crowd that gathered, a mix of shock and disbelief filling the air. An elderly woman muttered, "What is happening? Is that? No, it can't be." Even the moon above seemed to dim, casting an eerie glow on her anguished expression. The scene felt surreal, like a twisted play gone off script. Those who once revered her now stood frozen, grappling with the unfolding nightmare. Just as the cuffs clicked shut, the office door swung open behind her. Another officer, a young woman with wide eyes, rushed out, gasping, "Wait! That's the chief." The realization hit like a jolt of electricity. The air crackled as the atmosphere shifted with dizzying speed. Shock rippled through the crowd harder than a lightning bolt. Whispers morphed into gasps, and every jaw dropped to the ground. How could this be? Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The officers' faces paled, swallowing nerves and error. The weight of their mistakes threatened to crush them as their minds spun with disbelief. Desperation clung to the air like fog. This was not just a simple case of mistaken identity. It was a revelation that shook the very foundation of their authority. Suddenly, the low hum of unease turned electric, crackling with suspense. Would they take back the cuffs? Would they apologize? Or would pride consume them? As they wrestled with their choice, standing with their backs against the dark, unforgiving wall of reality, they were faced with a decision that would change everything. What happened next? The world held its breath, hearts pounding, eager to find out. The murmurs in the crowd swelled, feeding off the officers' indecision. The heavy air crackled with tension as eyes darted between the cuffed woman and her subordinates, searching for answers that no one could provide. How could they have not known? "Get her off the ground!" shouted the young officer, her voice piercing through the silence like a knife. But the bulkier cop remained frozen, his face a mixture of embarrassment and guilt. The chief's breath was rapid, eyes wide at the scene unfolding in front of her. It felt surreal, as if the universe had flipped upside down. They were supposed to protect her, yet here they were applying the very same violence she had vowed to eliminate from their ranks. Just then, the sound of approaching sirens pierced the tension, louder and more demanding with each passing second. The crowd began to murmur again, a mixture of outrage and disbelief. "You can't do this!" a voice cried out, one that belonged to a man pushing through the throng, anger glowing in his eyes. He was a community activist, one with a long-standing distrust of the police. Suddenly she caught his gaze piercing through the chaos. The chief straightened, her heart pounding furiously. If she didn't act, the moment would slip away, and her authority would collapse like a house of cards. "Enough!" she roared, causing the crowd to flinch, but the officers did not budge. Their hands tightened around the cuffs, as if drawing strength from the cold steel that bound her. The grizzled man's face turned ashen as realization dawned. We can't do this," he stammered, stepping back, giving his partner a chance to retract the cuffs. Amidst their reluctance, a shadowy figure slinked from the alley's mouth, unnoticed by the rest. A local journalist, phone raised high, was capturing every second. A bead of sweat trickled down the chief's neck. If this got out, it would spark a scandal that would ripple through the entire department. "Get the cameras out of here," the bulky cop shouted suddenly, frantically waving his arms as if to ward off an impending storm. But it was too late. Their moment of fury was being immortalized. The crowd began to chant, "Let her go! Let her go!" Their voices swelled, rising like a tide. It was a chant for justice, a chant the chief recognized all too well. They were rallying behind her, and with each voice her power grew stronger. "Take off the cuffs," the young officer yelled again, stepping closer, finally pulling on the collar of the man beside her. His eyes blazed with confusion but mirrored her urgency. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of the situation. Maybe it was the agony reflected in her eyes. Still, doubt lingered among the officers. What if they let her go, only to have it come back in fury? Would they be tarred with a brush of incompetence? The sonorous blast of a horn signaled that the backup units were close. Each second felt like an eternity. Would they arrest her for misconduct? Or would they reclaim their leader? The crowd held its collective breath, reality teetering on the edge of chaos. Just then the journalist, driven by instinct, shouted, "What's your decision, officers? Is she a criminal or your chief? This future is in your hands." As she stared into the stunned faces of her subordinates, a flicker of recognition ignited. They stood at a crossroads where fear met revelation, and she was the key to their choice. But before anyone could move, a voice crackled over the radio. "All units respond to a 10 to 75. Shots fired at the precinct." Time froze. The implications were clear. In a moment everything would change. Would they rise to the occasion? Or would the night end in horror? As an ominous silence enveloped them, eyes darted around for answers. The crowd tensed, ready for the next chapter of this unfolding nightmare. The radio call came like a jolt through the air, shattering the tense standoff. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each breath held tightly in the crowd. Uncertain glances exchanged between the officers splintered the fragile unity they had felt just moments before. The bulky cop's face blanched even more, turning from embarrassment to sheer panic. The chief's heart raced. This wasn't just any incident. Shots fired at the precinct meant chaos. It meant lives were at stake of her officers, of the bystanders, and most importantly, her own. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. A decision loomed, pressing harder than the cuffs that bound her wrists. "Stay with me," she shouted, her voice rising above the cacophony. Every officer's eyes shifted back to her, flickering with fear, uncertainty, and a desperate need for leadership. "This is not the time to hesitate." The young officer stepped forward, eyes fierce. "We have to protect you. Let us get you out of here." But the words hung in the air like fog. Outside, the faint sound of gunfire echoed through the streets, forcing the tension tighter. The crowd buzzed with fury and confusion, their chant morphing into a chorus of fear and doubt. A man towards the front yelled, "Do your job. Don't let fear take over." His voice was raw and cutting, challenging the very fabric of the police force's authority. "I thought you were different." Everything inside the chief twisted. She had tried to be different, to change everything from the ground up. How had it come to this? Suddenly she caught a glimpse of the journalist across the street, camera poised, cell phone broadcasting live. The unsettling realization settled in. Every second that passed was being documented. Failure now meant facing not only the crowd but the world outside these walls. She had to choose. Enough of this. She yelled with fierce resolve, the air vibrating with her urgency. "Take her cuffs off now." As if propelled by something greater than doubt, the young officer jerked at the cuffs. The bulky cop's eyes widened in shock but held back his hand. He shook his head, but the urgency in her voice had cracked the shell of his resistance. Then, piercing through the momentary chaos, another voice piped in from the crowd. "We need the police to keep us safe. But if you can't protect her, how can you protect us?" The community activist stepped closer, arms raised, drawing every gaze with a desperate confidence. Everyone held their breath. "Let her go and let's fight this fight together." "You're stronger than you think," he urged, his voice ringing with sincerity. In an instant, vulnerability swept through the officers. The chief seized the moment, feeling a surge of adrenaline. You all stood with me when we advocated for police reform. Do you want to turn that back now? The emotions rolled like thunder in the crowd, shifting from outrage to realization. Cuffs clinked more out of instinct than command as the bulky officer hesitated and finally unclasped the cuffs, releasing her with a low murmur. The chief flexed her sore wrists, feeling the rush of empowerment surge through her. But it was incomplete. The air still crackled with the unknown, the sirens echoing a growing urgency that was impossibly imminent. What now? The young officer whispered, stunned, scanning their surroundings. Bloated silence hovered, heavy and unyielding. Just then the distant sound of gunfire erupted again, cutting through the tension like a serrated knife. Shouts erupted from the precinct as officers desperately scrambled to contain the chaos, and the chief realized in that moment something darker was brewing beyond the crowd. Could her department withstand both external threats and internal conflict? Every heartbeat screamed for action. Her officers, their belief, the mission to protect them all, could shatter into ash if they didn't act fast. Go. Now, she commanded, voice steady but fiery. But as they turned to confront the chaos, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to transform. In the shadows lurking behind the crowd, something sinister flickered, watchful eyes, hidden agendas. What unforeseen dangers awaited just out of sight? Would they face the storm or fracture under pressure? As the air thickened with the taste of fear, it was the prize of leadership, a test that could cost them everything. The next act was about to unfold. Where would it lead them? The crowd erupted as chaos ignited once more, shouts mingling with the wail of sirens. The chief had a split second to assess the scene unraveling before her eyes. Officers, focus! She barked, her voice cutting through the noise. She could feel the energy shifting, electric with confusion. We need to create a perimeter. Move! Feeling the adrenaline thrumming in her veins, she surged ahead, her officers falling in behind her like an instinctive wave. They could sense the urgency, the need to protect, to contain, to act. Each step took them deeper into the pandemonium. As they neared the front lines of the angry crowd, she could see the faces gripped with rage, fear, and a thirst for justice. People shouted for visibility, some demanding accountability. Others, their voices cracked with pain, yelled for help. In the center of it all, a figure emerged, waving a tattered American flag as if it were a desperate signal. Protester, she realized. With each pulse of his voice, he urged the crowd to unite. This isn't just about her. I mean, who are we if we allow this to stand? The chief's heart hammered. He was right, they were all on the same side. Yet the fray twisted the narrative, threatening to unravel what she had fought for. Listen to him. We need to hold our ground, she called, her voice echoing in the chaos. But the overwhelming clamor drowned her out, swallowed whole by fear and anger. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire echoed again, nearer this time. The ground under her feet vibrated with harsh reality, striking like a jolt through the air. Screams erupted. A young mother clutched her child protectively while others scrambled, desperate to escape the sudden terror. Get behind me, she shouted instinctively, positioning herself as a barricade between the gunfire and the crowd. The officers fell in close, their bodies forming a sheathing barrier against chaos. But then a penetrating shout echoed from an unexpected quarter. A voice drenched in authority rang out. Everyone, stand down. We're here to help. The chief turned in shock as another group of officers in tactical gear emerged from a side street, their actions synchronized like a well-rehearsed dance. Who the hell are they? Whispered the young officer beside her, confusion etching lines of tension on his face. Back up, I hope, she murmured, her heart racing. But doubt festered. Or a different kind of threat. As the newcomer officers advanced, eyes darting nervously around, she noticed a flicker of recognition in the bulky officer's face, as if he knew them from somewhere. But before she could ask, an explosion of sound jolted the air, sending vibrations echoing through her body. A few figures at the edge of the crowd pushed forward, brandishing makeshift weapons. They're coming for us, one screamed. Attention slammed the atmosphere thick, unrest soaring with every second. This was escalating beyond her control. Shield the civilians, she screamed, her instincts surging. The scene devolved into chaos. Siren lights washed over the crowd like blood tainting pure water. Officers shouted orders, but confusion hung palpably. In the fray, the expansive shadow of a sniper's glint sliced through the air, a telltale marker of imminent danger. "Get down!" she shouted, adrenaline surging anew. But before she could move, she felt a tugging at her shoulder, fierce urgency in the grip. "We need to go." It was the young officer's voice again, strained and frantic. As she glanced around, the reality struck her. The fight wasn't just outside, it was within their ranks too. "Anyone with a gun points it at those they should protect," she inhaled sharply. "And they could turn it toward me." A shattering crash rang out from the precinct. Her chest tightened. What fresh hell awaited them behind those doors? Urgency beat through her heart, an echo of every choice she'd ever made. Would they stand united, or would they fracture? With one final look toward the cacophony of chaos, she took a step forward, but suddenly a shot rang out, piercing the air with a sound that felt like thunder. And then silence. The weight of the moment could crush mountains. Everything hung in that suspended stare, and the question loomed large. What happens when the lines between protector and threat blur beyond recognition? The stage was set. The next move would determine the fate of them all. But whose hand would deal it? A glimmer of movement caught the chief's eye, a shadow darting against the backdrop of chaos. Her instincts flared as she turned, rapid thoughts spinning in her mind. The silence was deafening, stretching uncomfortably until the next sound broke through, a cry, tortured and raw. "Mommy, I can't breathe." It was a child's voice, a heartbeat in the stillness. The chief's heart dived into her stomach. "Stay close," she shouted louder than before, desperation pervading her tone. She had to keep them safe, but how could she protect them when the very people meant to do that were trembling with fear? The tactical teams, now in position, acted on her shout, forming a triangle that surrounded the child and mother. Time slowed as the chief watched the officers exchange frantic looks. They were just as lost as everyone else, and that scared her more than anything. Suddenly, like a thunderstorm unleashing, the crowd erupted anew. Panic surged through the throng as people pushed and shoved, desperate to escape the invisible threat. The snipers, they would come again. The chief felt sweat bead on her brow, mingling with the weight of looming danger. "Focus on the perimeter. Watch your blind spots," she barked, her voice rising above the chaos. She felt a wave of authority surge within her, fighting to keep her composure as tremors of uncertainty raced through her. Amongst the chaos, she spotted a woman in a red shawl, arms raised high, trying to get everyone's attention. "We need to be calm. We need to make our voices heard together," the woman shouted, trying to temper the spiral of fear. "Yell what? That we're being hunted?" An angry voice retorted, bitterness dripping from every word. A wave of agreement rippled through the crowd as more voices joined in. Their tone shifted from fear to fury, hurling accusations that ricocheted off the precinct walls. Together, it became a growing storm, a fearsome wave of fire fueled by injustice that licked greedily at their hopes. Then, from within the chaos, a loud crash echoed. The air vibrated with the sound of glass shattering. "Back! Get back!" An officer yelled, but it was too late. A mass surged forward, a tidal wave of emotion crashing against the thin line of law enforcement. The chief's mind raced. "We need to establish control." But as she turned to see the newcomer officers flanking her, her thoughts froze. They were not backing down. Not even slightly. They stood resolute, but there was tension coursing through their movements. Something was off. As the shouts mingled with shrieks, a uniform caught the light. One of the tactical officers had a distinct insignia, unmarked by the department they were sworn to serve. The chief froze. "What are you doing here?" "You," but before she could finish, a deafening gunshot erupted, and an officer went down, face twisted in shock. Time slowed as she moved instinctively, her heart pounding in her ears. Chaos uncoiled around her like a monster ready to eat, and she couldn't tell who was shooting, or who was friend and foe any longer. "Get down!" she shouted again, adrenaline taking over as the atmosphere erupted around them. And then, through the smoke and screams, she saw him, the protester from earlier. His face contorted in unyielding determination as he rallied the crowd like a tempest. "Stand strong. We are the voice. Don't back down." The chief cursed under her breath. Would it come to a showdown? Would they lose everything she'd fought for? The line between loyalty and betrayal was fraying, and deep down, she felt it, the crushing weight of doubt in her gut. Then the crowd surged forward with renewed vigor. An overwhelming wave of humanity. The air was electric with fear and fury, And amidst it all, she realized she might not be able to protect anyone, not even herself. What would happen if they turned on her, if the very officers she commanded saw her not as a leader, but as the enemy? As officers shouted orders, and the crowd roared with pent-up rage, everything felt on the brink. The moment hung tight in the air, whispers of unrest echoing in their hearts. Would they stand as one or shatter into chaos? The question lingered like a dark cloud, heavy and pregnant with uncertainty. And as a shadow loomed closer, she knew that the next heartbeat could change everything forever. The air crackled with tension. It felt as if the very fabric of reality was stretching, and the impending snap was inevitable. The chief clutched her sidearm tighter, feeling the cold steel against her palm as she scanned the chaotic scene. Each face in the crowd seemed to morph, reflecting back a myriad of emotions: fear, anger, and a hunger for justice glinted in their eyes. In that moment, the gunshot was just a harbinger of greater violence yet to come. The officers around her were scrambling, a few already forming defensive positions, while others looked to her, confusion and desperation in their eyes. Would they listen? Step back. She projected her voice, struggling to keep it steady. Regroup. I need everyone to form a line behind me. Even as she shouted those words, doubt gnawed at her, a relentless whisper telling her that her authority was slipping away like grains of sand through fingers. The man in the crowd, the protester from earlier, raised his arms again. They'll fire on us. We're not going to just roll over. His passion ignited a wave of voices, a rising tide of defiance. The air pulsed with their unified anger, and it wrapped around her like a thick fog. Then another shot rang out, striking the ground where a child had stood just moments before. It was a moment frozen in time, a gasp resonating through the crowd. Shouts turned to screams, and one mother clutched her child against her, eyes wide with panic. The chief could feel her heart racing, echoing the frantic pulse around her. To me. All officers, to me. She stepped forward, determination surging like a rush of adrenaline. But the responding officers didn't budge. Instead, they hesitated, glancing around as if looking for someone else to take command. Do your jobs. Now, she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. It was an attempt to reestablish her role, her power amidst the swelling tide of chaos. The tension within her team was palpable, a light that could ignite into a firestorm in a matter of seconds. Suddenly, the shadow that had loomed over her now became a looming figure in the crowd, a man with a wild look in his eyes. He was moving towards her, pushing through the agitated mass. For a brief moment she thought he carried a weapon, and her breath caught in her throat. Stay back, she yelled, raising her weapon instinctively. Do not come any closer. She forced her voice to remain steady, even as her heart raced. The gathering tension felt like a taut string threatening to snap. But the man held his hands up, revealing them empty. I'm here to help. I know what's going on. You're in danger, he cried, his eyes darting nervously around as bullets zipped past them. Danger? You think I need your help? The chief's voice dripped with incredulity. Trust was a fragile thing, and right now she didn't know if she could trust anyone, friend or foe. Yet something in his voice tugged at her. She glanced at her officers, assessing their readiness. Their eyes reflected uncertainty, and it struck her that the enemy might not just lie in the crowd but within her own ranks. Suddenly everything erupted. More shots rang out, among them, she couldn't determine who was firing. A fellow officer fell beside her, gasping for air, confusion masking his face. Stay low. Move back towards the cars. She motioned, desperation urging her words. But as they turned, she noticed the protesters' eyes widen in horror. No, not that way. What? Where? And before reality could register, she felt a shove from behind, her feet losing ground as the crowd flowed around her like a halted river, unnoticed until it was too late. She fought for air, her vision darkening as the cry of chaos consumed her. Shadows engulfed her, voices shouting, mingling with the cries of fear and pain. Then her thoughts turned back, a fleeting image whispering through clouds of confusion. If their cries held truth, who could she trust if chaos reigned in body and spirit? Then, everything went dark. What awaited her in the unknown? Would loyalty emerge from the chaos, or would betrayal be the price to pay? Darkness enveloped her like a heavy fog, pressing against her from all sides. The chief fought to break free from its grip, her senses straining to catch the sounds, the voices breaking through. Confusion twisted in her gut as chaos faded momentarily into silence. Suddenly, a rush of light stung her eyes as she was thrust back into the harsh reality of the scene. She lay on the ground, her chest heaving, fingers clawing at the dirt, as fragments of the world around her crashed in like a tide. Men and women filled her vision, some scrambling away, others shouting at each other in panic. The acrid smell of gunpowder stung her nostrils. "Chief! Stay down!" a voice shouted nearby, snapping her attention. Her heart raced as she struggled to find her bearings, forcing her body to respond. Memories rushed back, her officers, the crowd, her fading command, and the panic drumming in her ears. "On your feet!" she commanded as the fog of confusion began to lift. She looked around, trying to orient herself, but the faces were blurred by adrenaline and fear. The earlier chaos felt like a crushing weight on her chest. A figure loomed beside her, an officer, one of hers, but he looked shaken. "They're coming this way," he shouted, panic flickering in his eyes. "We need to get out." "No." She pulled herself upright, the sharp effort sending a jolt through her. "Form a perimeter. Protect the civilians." But deep down, her voice trembled with uncertainty. The sound of shouts grew louder, the anger ramping up once more. A sharp crack echoed, making her flinch. An officer hadn't just fallen. He was sprawled on the pavement, blood pooling beneath him. "Move! Now!" As she urged her team, the crowd surged, a living entity of wild energy and fear. The protesters, wild with emotion, were now realizing the danger they were in. "Do you even see what's happening here?" The man from before, the one who had warned her, stepped into her line of sight again. "You're turning on your own people. You think I don't know that?" The chief snapped, her frustration boiling over. "We're all in this together." Doubts boomed in her mind. She could feel the division closing in, the loyalty of the one she led wavering like a delicate thread. More officers rallied around her, struggling to hold the line. One dared to question, "Why stay?" "You saw what they did, Chief. Because it's ultimately our duty. We don't abandon our posts." She spat, her heart aching at her own words. Did she really believe that? Then the crowd surged once again, and she found herself pushing back against the tide, her view narrowing. A flash of silver caught her eye, a weapon raised high. Was it a badge or a blade? "Get down!" she yelled, a raw urgency clawing at her throat. People screamed as the loud crack of gunfire broke again, ricocheting through the chaos like a thunderclap. It was pandemonium, a jigsaw of fear and confusion folding into itself. But beneath it all, an inkling of understanding bubbled up. This wasn't just about her officers. It was about the very heart of their community and the trust that had slipped away. Then she saw the protester again, wild with fear yet forged by determination. He was making his way toward them, yelling something, words lost in the tumult, but the fire in his eyes was unmistakable. "Listen, we're not your enemy." His voice cut through the bedlam, igniting something deep within her. But as she started to process that ray of hope, darkness loomed once more. An unmistakable sound drew closer, a roar of engines pulling into the fray. "Cars! They're bringing in backup!" an officer shouted, pointing into the street. The chief's heart sank. Was this backup or a trap? She had to decide in that moment. The choice was clear: fight or flee. At that crossroads, tension hung heavy, thick as the smoke that surrounded them. "Everyone! We hold our ground." But deep down a new dread formed. As the roar of engines inched closer, she couldn't shake the feeling that danger was now coming from every direction. Would she manage to unite her team, or would this fracture rip them apart for good? And as the first shadowy figures moved into view, a chilling question settled over her. Who was truly on her side? The rumble of engines crescendoed like a heartbeat, growing louder with each passing moment. The chief's jaw tightened, a grim resolve crawling down her spine. Shadows transformed into figures, their silhouettes stark against the blaze of headlights that cut through the smoke. Were these allies, or would they bring more chaos? "Stay alert," she shouted, her voice cutting through the din like a knife. "Prepare for anything." Officers shifted, bracing themselves, eyes darting between the advancing vehicles and the shouting crowd. The fear etched on their faces mirrored her own. The ground beneath them felt charged, electric, the air heavy with potential violence. The chief squinted as the first vehicle rolled to a stop. Familiar colors, dark blue and silver. They're ours, she exclaimed, a flicker of relief dancing along her nerves. But her heart still raced, knowing well what a single spark could ignite on this powder keg of tension. Would there be understanding, or just more violence masquerading as law? Doors swung open, and officers poured out, some their allies from the precinct, but others, faces new and cold, donned in stern expressions that didn't speak of solidarity. She could see their uniforms, not just hers, but also others from different districts, officers ready for action, interpreting the chaos as a call to arms. What's going on? Do they know we're here? One of her officers yelled, his voice tinged with desperation. Look, someone else gasped, pointing toward the demonstrators. The protester from before a beacon amidst the chaos was now moving with purpose, pushing forward toward the police line. He was flanked by others clutching signs emblazoned with messages of hope and defiance, demanding peace. They could not tell their backs had also been to the wall, fighting an unseen enemy, their own fear. Stop! The chief barked, but the roar of the crowd drowned her out. The men and women she had sworn to protect surged with a visceral urgency. It was changing, a tide turning fast, and she felt like a raft in a torrent. Then, amid the surge, a single gunshot rang out. The sound sliced through the murmur of chaos, leaving an almost heartrending silence in its wake. All eyes shot toward the source. Fear transformed into a silent plea that hung heavily in the air. Everyone stepped back. The chief's voice thundered, though she could barely hear herself. The optics of this, so much potential for disaster, rose like bile in her throat. She stepped forward, fighting against the surge of bodies, desperate to reclaim agency. We need to stop this. We need to talk. The protester stood right before her, chest heaving, eyes wide with a mix of dread and resolve. We need you. You're our chief. The words landed like artillery, shaking her foundation. She searched for a reply, a resolution, but only found the knot in her stomach tightening. The realization hit her squarely in the chest. Her own people were now questioning her. A crackle of noise broke her thoughts as another officer fell to the ground, his gasping breath sending shockwaves through the crowd. An eerie quiet momentarily enveloped the group, shaken by the sight. Panic erupted again, but this time it was unfocused, a blend of retaliation and retreat, and she could feel the line between chaos and control blurring. Hold your fire. The words came not just from the chief but echoed from others, a chorus rising against the cacophony. But as the crowd moved, a shimmer of authority flickered within her. Somehow in that chaos, within the pools of uncertainty, she had to stand, had to rally them. But the next heartbeat brought something fresh, a sharp, malevolent scream cut through the night, forcing her heart to plummet. Across the street, a woman was crumpled on the pavement, her face twisted in anguish. Help! The words broke off as the figure was yanked violently away, and terror bled into the crowd. The images flooded her mind, an innocent caught in the crossfire. Could she stand by? She turned, resolve stealing her spine as uncertainty danced like shadows. Rushing forward, she shouted, "We! Not leaving anyone behind." But who would stand with her? As she moved closer, the figures around her blurred into shadows. Distrust thickened the air like smoke, whispering their fears back into the dark night. Could she manage this before it all unraveled? In that moment of decision, she sensed the rift tear wider. When she reached the woman, every heartbeat echoed doubt. And as the night stretched on, a single thought lingered. Was this the moment that defined her? Or the moment that would mark the end of everything she believed in? The crowd surged like a tidal wave, an unrelenting force of desperation and fear, until the chief was practically swallowed whole. She felt the weight of their collective anguish pressing down on her. Each terrified face was a reflection of the chaos swirling around them. Gritting her teeth, she pushed through the sea of bodies, each step heavy with urgency. Then suddenly the crowd shifted. Someone had grabbed her arm, yanking her back. She turned, eyes narrowing in instinctive violence, only to find a wide-eyed officer staring back at her. "Chief, you can't just go in there," he exclaimed, his voice barely cutting through the din. "Someone needs help." She shot back, heart racing. The woman sprawled on the pavement remained her focus, a still figure in a world spinning out of control. But the gunshots, it's a risk. Risk or not, that's someone's life. The tension between them crackled, but he reluctantly released her arm, eyes darting to where the woman had been. Another scream pierced the din, sending shockwaves through the group. Voices scrambled in a frenzied mix of confusion. The chief glanced back, searching for familiar faces among the ranks of her officers. What would she say to them? All she found were expressions frozen in fear, mirroring her own uncertainty. "Stand ready," another officer shouted, raising his weapon as if it could shield them from the chaos erupting around them. She couldn't lose track of the woman now. She felt the pull of duty, the resolve to infiltrate the chaos, breaking through her fear of the unknown. She took a step away from the protective ring of officers surrounding her, squaring her shoulders. "Help me!" A shout rang from the street, and she focused on the woman again, half visible behind a crush of bodies. Was she unconscious? Dazed? "Make a path. Move." The chief's voice rose above the crowd, fueled by a motherly instinct that surged through her veins. She couldn't let this moment slip away. The tension fractured and reluctantly, some officers began to carve a space. With each inch gained, hope flickered to life within her. But then, as if orchestrated by fate, something heavy struck the pavement with a sickening thud. Another shot echoed. Not aimed at anyone on the front lines, but instead somewhere out of sight, out of reach. The energy in the air shifted, snapping taut like a bowstring, while panic erupted anew. A wave swept back as the realization dawned that more shots could follow. People stumbled and screams ensued, drowning out everything but chaos. "Stay with me. Hold it together." She fought to be the voice of reason, merging her presence with that of leaders who unyieldingly protect their own. But the faces turned from her, uncertainty reigned supreme, exposing her vulnerabilities. Desperation clawed at her throat as the crowd rushed past her, and she felt herself losing them to fear. But then, just as hope threatened to vanish, a cry reached her ears, a gut-wrenching plea filled with raw emotion. "Help her. Please." It wasn't the commander's voice she had come to know. It was a stranger's, yet it pulled her relentlessly back to ground zero. The officer next to her cursed under his breath as he whipped his head toward the direction of the shout. "We gotta go." She did not wait for approval. She plunged into the throng, the world around her fading to a blur. Each heartbeat thudded louder than the last. She fought her way forward, desperate but resolute, until at last she reached the woman. Tension wrapped around her like a vice, squeezing until she could barely breathe. But there lay the woman, eyes widening in recognition. "Don't worry. I'm here," she cried, but before she could cradle the woman's head, the ground shook beneath them as screams reached a fever pitch. She felt a tremor ripple through the crowd, a collective realization. The police were not the only armed presence tonight. As the chaos unfolded, one burning question laid bare amid the confusion. Who had fired that shot, igniting a blaze that threatened to consume them all? The terror of the moment seeped through her skin, tightening her resolve, but there was no looking back now. The next step had to be made, and she couldn't let the perception of control slip from her fingers. "Back. Everyone back." The chief's order rang out like a beacon, but another revelation flickered within her, twisting the air. What if this wasn't the reckoning she had expected? What if this was just the beginning? The sound of chaos erupted like a storm, drowning everything around Chief Simmons. She was on her knees, adrenaline pumping, struggling to support the woman on the pavement, an innocent caught in the eye of a violent storm. Voices screamed. The air was thick with smoke. Gunfire rang out like fireworks against the night sky. "Get up. Help her," she pleaded. Fury etched in her features, but disorientation reigned. Officers scattered like leaves in a windstorm, all too affected by the rage and confusion swirling around them. The line had blurred who was friend, who was foe. She could feel the incredulous eyes of her officers on her, filled with doubt. Could they trust her after everything that had unfolded? Fear surged through the chief like ice in her veins. Could they even call themselves protectors anymore? Suddenly, the protester from before found a way into her frenzied thoughts. "Chief," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "We need you to lead us. We need your strength to put an end to this madness." Each word was a lifeline tossed into a raging sea. He stood firm against the tide, rallying those traumatized by the wave of emotion crashing around them. "Listen to him," Chief Simmons called, desperation matching his fervor. "This is our community. They're not our enemies. We're all caught in this web of chaos." Hope flickered in her heart as she recognized a powerful truth in his appeal. With him she might just sway the tide. But a low thud echoed, followed by another gunshot, drawing the crowd's focus like a magnet. They gasped as chaos poured out from the other side of the street, a glimmer of weapons flashing, their brandished insignias unrecognizable. A wave of confusion crept in, dragging familiar faces into shadows. "Stay with me," she commanded her officers. Her gaze pierced through the haze, seeking the eyes of her comrades. "We can't break. We need to protect the people." She felt the weight of her voice pulling them closer, bringing them back to the purpose they shared. Then, in a moment of collective decision, officers began to rally around Chief Simmons. She could see their resolve strengthening, a fire igniting within them as they moved forward. It was a small victory amid chaos, but it meant everything. "Let us go," she shouted, ushering them toward the fray. As they pushed deeper into the crowd, rally cries transformed the air. "We're in this together. For change." Simultaneously, anger and unity merged, an overwhelming push for justice flowing from their core. She felt energy pulse through her veins, transforming fear into determination. "Protect the people," Chief Simmons yelled, leading the charge, every cell in her body alive with the energy of a leader finding her voice once more. Officers formed lines to shield civilians, creating a fortress against the encroaching madness, regaining both their authority and purpose. And in that heartbeat of clarity, a moment suspended in time, she spotted the young woman in red, fear subsiding as compassion swelled in her eyes. They were not alone, they were fortified together, a community standing strong against the night. But then the world shifted again. A powerful roar echoed through the chaos, and for a brief moment time paused. Sirens wailed in the distance, a melody of impending relief intertwined with the destructiveness around them. Backup units were on their way, officers who could still believe in collective strength. "Hold the line," Chief Simmons rallied, her words ringing true. They stood resolutely, shielded by their loyalty, their hearts resonating with the same pulse of change. They could feel it. The battle was not just for survival, but for a future they believed in. As the new officers arrived, tension coiled like a spring. They combined forces, forming a wider shield. The boundaries between ranks faded. They were one together with the protesters rallying for change. In that moment, chaos transformed into a collective cry, and undeniable power surged through, illuminating both fear and hope. "Justice! We want justice!" The crowd rallied, and as the voices merged, the air shifted. "What must we do?" Chief Simmons whispered, the weight of possibility settling across her shoulders. But she knew. Connect, empathize, and rise united. This was the only way. Together they leapt forward, arms intertwined with the community, protecting one another against whatever was waiting next. As dawn broke on the horizon, casting warmth through tears of relief and unity, Chief Simmons knew this was their farewell to the old ways. It was the end of their past, but the beginning of a beautiful, transformative journey. Chief Simmons looked into the eyes of her team and the community. A radiant surge of hope ignited within her. And finally, with a voice unwavering, she shouted, "Let us build a future together." But before the echoes of their voices could fade into silence, the world took a breath, the ground beneath trembling with possibility. This was not just a farewell. It was a promise to rise again, stronger, united, and unyielding. If you felt the passion in this story, you need to subscribe now. Don't miss our next exclusive content that dives into these gripping narratives. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and help our community grow. Flood the comments below with your reactions and theories about this powerful ending. We want to know what you think. And don't wait even one more second to share this with at least 5 friends who need to witness this conclusion. Your support means the world to us, and together, we'll continue to build a movement worth fighting for.